Gruber. I'm coordinator of global education at Moraine, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here this afternoon. This is our first global education event for the semester, and we are very pleased to have such a nice turnout. If you notice the invitation caption, and I know you've noticed the screen, you see that we have titled this afternoon's event the Fulbright Legacy. But what must a person do to receive the title Legacy in terms of his or her life? Before the afternoon is over, we'll have an answer to that, as we hear about the extraordinary life of the late Senator J. William Fulbright and our honored guest this afternoon, Harriet Fulbright, his wife. And to fill you in on that extraordinary life, that pair of extraordinary lives, I'd like to welcome to the podium Dr. Pamela Haney, who is Dean of Liberal Arts at Moraine, and she is going to introduce Mrs. Fulbright. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Before I begin, I would just like to acknowledge some of our guests that we have here today and just make some acknowledgments before I actually introduce Mrs. Fulbright. First of all, Dr. Vernon Crowley, the president of Moraine Valley, could not be here today. He is unable to attend, but he would just like Mrs. Fulbright to know that he truly appreciates her commitment to the Fulbright program and also appreciates her willingness to come to Moraine Valley to speak to us today about her life's works. So could we just give her a hand before we get started? I would also like to begin by thanking Dr. Linda Gruber for making this event possible today. She's truly instrumental on this campus with her work in the global education department. Also today we have, and could you please stand as I acknowledge you, Dr. Linda Gruber, who was just here. Also, we have with us today, Dr. Nancy Bentley is here with us today, and she is our Vice President of Student Development. Next in our acknowledgments, we have a representative of our Moraine Valley Community College Board, and that is our Board President, Ms. Sandra Wagner. Also, we have some Foundation Board members with us today, and I'm going to acknowledge them at this time. We have Maureen Neiswanger, Mr. Phil Foster, over on the side, and Ms. Maria DiCaprio Santa. Also, this event could not be possible without our staff from the Center for Teaching and Learning. Could I ask all of the Center for Teaching and Learning staff to just stand at this time and be recognized for their efforts in making this event possible for us? We would also like to recognize our Moraine Valley student leaders and advisors. Are they present? Students? Our Moraine Valley students? Thank you. The international Fulbright students from Chicagoland universities are with us today. We're pleased to have them. We also have staff members from the Institute of International Education, and this is the administrative arm of the Fulbright program in Chicago. Could those staff members please stand? Dr. Dolores Rinke of Purdue University, who is also the National Treasurer of the Fulbright Association. And last but not least, we have Attorney Donald Garner, who is the President of Fulbright Chicago and President-elect of the Rotary Chicago. We thank you all for being with us today. And now, to introduce Mrs. Harriet Fulbright. Mrs. Fulbright has spent the majority of her adult life in the fields of education and the arts. From 1997 until 2000, she was the Executive Director of the President's Committee on the Arts and the Humanities, whose mission it is to encourage partnerships between the public and private sectors in order to enhance cultural life in America. Prior to this position, she served as unofficial ambassador for the 50th anniversary of the Fulbright program, and in that capacity, she traveled to numerous countries on all 5 major continents and all over the United States to speak about the importance of international education exchange and the pivotal role played by the Fulbright program. When I was just reading through her bio and her information, just the experience itself alone is just overwhelming, and I was just so amazed by all the things that she's done. I couldn't list them all today if I tried, so I'm just going to highlight some of them. Her teaching experience is extensive. While living in Korea, she taught English composition and creative writing at Ewha Women's University, and in Moscow taught non-English speaking first graders to speak and read English. Her administrative experience is also wide-ranging. When the Congressional Arts Caucus was formed on Capitol Hill, she was its first ambassador director, and she was later appointed executive secretary of the International Congress of Art Historians at the National Gallery Center for the Advanced Study in the Arts. In 1987, she became the executive director of the Fulbright Association. From 1990 to 1996, she was the president of the Center for Arts in the Basic Curriculum, an organization which advocated education reform and conducted teacher training seminars. For the last decade, her lecture tours have been worldwide. She has been invited to give talks on such diverse topics as the vital role of international education exchange, arts education and its importance, the life of Senator J. William Fulbright, leadership and human progress, September the 11th and its impact, and life as a cancer patient. Mrs. Fulbright has a BA from Radcliffe College and an MFA from the George Washington University. She has also received honorary degrees, a doctorate in law from the University of Scranton, and doctorates in humane letters from Long Island University and from the Bank Street College of Education. Mrs. Fulbright shared with her late husband a dedication to the search for peaceful solutions to conflicts throughout the world. We are pleased to present to you today Mrs. Harriet Fulbright.
Thank you very much for having me. I really love being here, and I love talking about this subject. So, and it's also a real pleasure to be back in Illinois, where my youngest daughter went to college, and where I therefore spent many weekends visiting, and where I've also spoken a number of times on my favorite subject, namely my husband, Senator J. William Fulbright, and his ideas, very important. Because we all tend to remember images a bit better than the spoken word alone, I have put together a series of photos taken of him throughout his life, and so that just to give you a better feeling for who this human being is, as well as what he thought and wrote. Young Bill Fulbright grew up in a small university town of Fayetteville, Arkansas, a middle child in a family of 6 children. And as you can see, here he is enjoying the White River, which he helped to protect and develop while he was in the Senate. His parents considered the education of both boys and girls as one of their highest priorities. So he was sent off to kindergarten on to the experimental school run by the University of Arkansas, where curriculum emphasized self-reliance, intellectual assertiveness, and experiential learning as advocated in the writings of John Dewey. While the content was largely that of a classical education, it also had a good deal of psychology, sociology, and political economy. There he remained until he graduated from high school, giving him the opportunity to say much later that he held the record for taking longer than anyone else to get through the University of Arkansas, namely 16 years. And before anybody accuses me of coming up short as a mathematician, let me explain that he really did complete 13 years of schooling in 12 years. Because his father did not approve of idleness in his children, he was sent at the age of 12 to a family farm in the summer to work in the fields. The task given him was shoveling grain into feed bags. At the end of each day, he was not only sweltering from the humid 90-plus degree heat, but covered with chaff and dust. The next summer, when he was given the choice between another similar summer job or school, guess what? That decision was easy. As a result, Bill advanced quickly through high school and graduated from the university at the age of 20. During his senior year, his English professor encouraged him to apply for a Rhodes Scholarship. He'd never heard of such a thing, but he thought, why not? Unlike most other scholarships, Rhodes had 3 equally important requirements. A good academic record, of course, but a clear demonstration of leadership skills and athletic prowess. Though his grades were not the very best among all the applicants, he did have an advantage over the others in non-academic spheres. While in college, he led the tennis team, and believe it or not, he was a football star, gaining fame as the most valuable player in one of the few games Arkansas won against Texas A&M. He also was elected senior class president, which fulfilled the scholarship's requirement for leadership potential. Fulbright was therefore chosen to represent Arkansas that year at Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar, and for the rest of his life he maintained that more than any other factor, it determined the course of his career. His mother was so proud of him that she paid him a visit and was photographed here at Oxford's Pembroke College with his classmates. For 3.5 years, he worked harder than ever before under the tutelage of Pembroke Master Robert McCallum, studying history and learning to write and think with precision and clarity, and traveling extensively throughout Europe. He maintained later that unless you really know and learn how to write, you never really learn how to think. So this was truly an important time in his life. After returning home, Fulbright went to Washington, D.C. and entered the George Washington University for a law degree. After graduation, he worked for the Justice Department and then taught law at his law school for a few years before returning to his home in Fayetteville. His life as a law professor at the University of Arkansas and as a business partner of his mother in the family business came to an abrupt end with the untimely accidental death of the university's president. The board chose Fulbright to become the youngest president of a university in the country at the age of 34. During that time, he made a name for himself as a forthright speaker in demand at colleges all around the country, unafraid to express unpopular opinions, always in the eloquent English that he learned at Oxford. The honor was short-lived, however. At the time, the state's governor, Homer Adkins, controlled the Board of Trustees with an iron hand, and he was not a favorite of President Fulbright's mother, Roberta, who ran the local newspaper. She had supported his political opponent, and after his election, she wrote in an editorial bemoaning the fact that the people of Arkansas seemed to prefer a backslapper to a man of substance. It was not long before Governor Adkins, unable to punish the mother, dismissed the son on graduation day after only 2 years of service. So Fulbright returned to the family business and to teaching law part-time. Within a short time, however, a former student told Professor Fulbright that he was going to retire from his office in the U.S. Congress House of Representatives, and he was looking for a successor to his post. After studying the possibilities, he felt that his former teacher was the outstanding candidate, and he therefore told Fulbright that it was time that he put his actions where his words had run on for so many semesters. In class, one of Fulbright's favorite phrases was that if the best and the brightest did not run for office, democracy would falter. So Fulbright took his student's challenge and won a seat in the House of Representatives in 1942. 1 year later, he gained nationwide notice by initiating the resolution that led to the establishment of the United Nations. He managed to steer it through the House of Representatives with a landslide vote of 329 to 61. And partly because of this statewide recognition for this act, in 1944, he won the Arkansas Senate seat in a race against the very governor who had him fired, something he always related with a quiet smile. As senator, Fulbright made many significant contributions to his state of Arkansas in the fields of agriculture, water conservation, interstate commerce, and education. He made a name for himself in reforming the laws by which the banking industry was regulated, and for being the only senator to vote against appropriation for Joe McCarthy's House Un-American Activities Committee. Whatever legislation he proposed was only submitted after careful research, often through hearings that he considered a means to educating the public, as well as himself and his fellow congressmen. In fact, the single most important role of a legislator in a democratic system was, in his opinion, that of educator. My own belief is that the basic issues of foreign policy, as distinguished from its details and technicalities, are well within the grasp of ordinary citizens, provided these issues are explained clearly and accurately by competent and responsible leaders. To the extent that issues fall beyond the people's experience, or in the instances of conflict between groups in which the larger interest of the community is unclear, the political leader has a greater responsibility to identify the larger interest and to explain it. It then becomes his responsibility to lead and to educate. So, in 1945, right after the atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan, he called to the Senate chambers not only military and political experts to testify on the long-term effects of the event, but physicians, psychologists, scientists, environmentalists, and those who created the bomb. What he heard so appalled him that he felt compelled to look for some means, any means, of preventing another world war. Atomic warfare was no longer an acceptable continuation of diplomacy by other means. In a world with nuclear weapons, the enemy cannot be destroyed because the true enemy is war itself. The program which grew out of the hearing is the one he considered his greatest accomplishment toward the end of his life, namely the International Education Exchange Program, which bears his name, signed by President Truman on August 1, 1946. It became clear to him, especially as he looked back on his experience as a Rhodes Scholar, that if we could get to know one another and to learn to exchange ideas, then perhaps we might not be so willing to exchange bullets. The program started modestly, with small boatloads of students moving to and from the United States. Fulbright stayed quiet for the first several years because of the suspicion that anything international engendered. For example, about 6 months after the passage of this bill, a Senate colleague told Fulbright that he would have stopped such a nonsense if he had caught it in time, because it was dangerous to expose our fine young boys and girls to those outrageous foreign isms. You didn't know that's what you thought, did you? Luckily, we're changing. However, his quiet efforts were persistent, and he traveled to many countries to help celebrate the establishment of Fulbright commissions and later their anniversaries. His reputation in the whole field of foreign affairs grew, and in 1959, he became chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, a post he kept for 15 years, longer than any senator in history. Fulbright's interest in education, however, remained a primary interest and was not confined to the international sphere. He considered education of all citizens to be the essential cornerstone of a democracy. Only with a thoughtful, responsible, and committed citizenry could a democratic country offer all who lived and worked within its confines the chance for a decent, productive, and satisfying life. Education, in his view, was the only hope in the struggle to break the barriers of prejudice and xenophobia, to increase knowledge of self, and in so doing, to gain a better perception of others. He tried to convey this message to every person, especially those who worked in his office, including one young man from Arkansas who won this country's last 2 presidential elections in the 1990s. Part of his concern came from the growing international entanglements of this country, namely the Vietnam War. For months in the mid-1960s, Fulbright tried to convince President Johnson that this battle was not in the interests of the United States for myriad reasons. As long as the discussion was in private, they remained friends. But as soon as Fulbright made his views public, Johnson's intense hostility towards him was perhaps the greatest trial of his political life. President Johnson lashed out at him in many ways, including engineering a cut in the Fulbright program funds by 70%. As we all know, the program survived the attack and grew considerably afterwards, but the two men who were close friends until that time never spoke again, and this hurt Fulbright deeply. By 1974, Senator Fulbright had spent 30 years of service in the Senate. He had made a name for himself as the thinker, the voice of reason, a man interested in fairness and justice for all. Once he left the Senate, numerous countries bestowed the highest honors on him. Here, Japan's Foreign Minister Miyazawa awarded him the Royal Order of the Rising Sun in 1975. And in 1989, he went on to Greece to receive the Onassis Peace Prize, given by Prime Minister. A year later, at the Kennedy Center, honored him as the man who conceived the idea of a National Center for Performing Arts and was responsible for the creation of the Kennedy Center. And on his 88th birthday in 1993, President Clinton attended the party and, as a surprise, gave him the United States Presidential Medal of Freedom. In his last book, The Price of Empire, Senator Fulbright made it clear that of all the legislation and programs he initiated, the most important was his international education exchange program in pursuit of peace. The great strength and enduring value of the Fulbright program has been its ability to work patiently and persistently to build human networks around the globe. These networks are essential because the path toward a peaceful world must be paved by those with the ability to listen, to understand differing ways of thinking, to change minds through persistent persuasion rather than by force. As he said, in our quest for world peace, the alteration of attitude is no less important and perhaps more important than the resolution of issues. It is in the minds of men, after all, that wars are spawned. To act upon the human mind, regardless of the issue or occasion for doing so, is to act upon the source of conflict and the potential source of redemption and reconciliation. Extreme nationalism and dogmatic ideology are luxuries that the human race can no longer afford. It must turn its energies now to the politics of survival. If we do so, we may find in time that we can do better than just survive. We may find that the simple human preference for life and peace has an inspirational force of its own, less intoxicating perhaps than the sacred abstractions of nation and ideology, but far more relevant to the requirements of human life and human happiness. My husband's voice is still now, but we can and must gather from all continents and use our minds and hearts to wrestle with vital global issues together. The Fulbright experience is not something one can dismiss after returning home. Like it or not, in one way or another, it is a lifelong commitment. And I thank you all from the bottom of my heart for all of your great work and for your willingness to make that commitment. Are there any questions?
Are there any questions at this time?
At what point in his life did you meet?
I met him late because I was the executive director starting in 1987 of the Fulbright program, and he was my honorary chair. And so we met over lunch. He was a widower. His very wonderful wife of over 50 years had passed away a few years before. And so we talked business over lunch, and then he started inviting me to things he felt he had to go to, these ceremonial things, and he hated being alone. He wasn't used to it. And then a year into the job, I got run over by a truck. And you wonder why on earth that had anything to do with the price of it. Well, it had a lot to do with it because my left leg was smashed and still has a rod running through it. And after a month in the hospital, the telephone rang, and his voice at the other end of the phone said, "You can't feed yourself on those 2 sticks. And I have a housekeeper, and so you're going to have supper here from now on." And so from then on, I did have supper there. And we became the very, very best of friends and ultimately married. Yes.
As this book was written 40 years ago, do you see any similarities of continuing arrogance?
I see it is as relevant today as it was 40 years ago. There are obviously things in that book which refer to events very much of the time when he wrote it. But the ideas are as urgent and as important right now as they were then. And I hope you enjoy it. Yes.
What do you hope to ultimately accomplish through speaking about the Fulbright Legacy, talking about your husband?
Well, what I hope to accomplish is a better idea of his ideas, which I think is really important. And I hope to inspire you and others to take a second look at different ways of being, hopefully in the country where these different ways of being exist. Back when he first started the program, you know, this country is surrounded on 2 sides by water, unlike a lot of others. And so it's harder for us to easily travel to places with different languages and different customs. And so our isolationism comes naturally. It's not because we are defective in any way. It's just that's the way it is. We're also a big country. But in this global world, we've got to get over our feeling that we have all the answers. And granted, many of us don't feel that way. But enough of us do to keep me talking. Yes.
I think especially in these times, with all these international frictions going on, having the United States involved in that, unfortunately, most of the time, I'm very happy to be here, and that I think it's very important to have that change program going on. So can we expect that it will continue?
Well, I am very, very happy to say that this administration is proposing an increase in the Fulbright program for the coming year. So they understand its importance. We now have 28 Fulbright students from Iraq in this country. They arrived half a year ago. We have also students from Afghanistan. And I am part of a group called the Coalition for Citizen Diplomacy, working very hard on the increase of both visibility and activity of all those groups, not just Fulbright, but sister cities, people to people, the Council of International Visitors, Save the Children. There were 35 of us met last March to figure out how we could make these programs more visible and attract more citizens into them. And this year is the year where we're hoping to plan for a lot of small meetings, symposia, conferences in all 50 states. I participated in Springfield, Illinois, in a big evening on citizen diplomacy. And then in 2006, we hope to have a national summit in Washington. That's another reason why I shoot my mouth off here.
Once again, let's thank Mrs. Fulbright for being with us today, for that inspiring message. At this time, we would like to present Mrs. Fulbright with a piece of classwork from internationally known artist Matt Lamb, and also a letter of appreciation from our president, Dr. Vernon Crowley. And also, as a reminder, there are some copies of Senator Fulbright's book that are left, Arrogance of Power, and they are available in the back of the room. There are limited copies, so if you would like to get your copy, please do so before you leave today. This concludes our program, and I would like to thank everyone for coming out.